Hello, everyone. At this point, you may have finished your research question or a preliminary research question, and you're starting to think about developing a research plan. What I'd like to do is just go over a broad view of developing the research plan, a bird's eye view, if you will. So we're going to identify considerations when developing a plan for our research, and we'll identify components of a well thought out research plan. Now, as we move through the 808 course, we'll get into much greater detail on all of these items, but I just wanted you to see some things that are important to consider. Some major considerations with developing a research plan is first to consider your research question. Seems obvious, right? We need to take our time, develop a researchable research question. When I say researchable, I mean something that could actually be answered, a question that could be answered. Some questions are very good questions. They're thought-provoking. They may be philosophical, but there's no way to necessarily get a clear answer on them through research. So it has to be a question that's researchable. And we always come back to this research question with whatever research activities we do as we move through with our project. Depending on the research question, you might want to dive into either quantitative or qualitative research methods. If you're asking what the nature of the experience of something is, like what's the nature of experience of being 1 day post-op post-mastectomy? How does the woman feel? That would be best answered using qualitative methods. Or if you want to just measure pain and anxiety in quantitative fashion, 1 day post-op mastectomy, you could do that too. But you're focusing on certain concepts then that can be measured with numbers, versus exploring the words that someone's giving you. So you'll need to determine whether quantitative or qualitative methods will get you the answer to your research question. Now, if you decide to do quantitative research, it might be experimental, where you're manipulating a variable. Maybe you're comparing morphine versus Dilaudid in treating pain post-mastectomy. So you have two groups, and that would be experimental. Or you have a pre-test, post-test. Before an intervention and after an intervention, you're measuring something that we can assign numbers to. Or it could be non-experimental or a descriptive study, which is a little further down in our list, where you're reviewing charts to see, I don't know, maybe how long it's taken someone to get admitted to your particular unit or a particular unit or a number of units in a health center. That would be an example. You're not manipulating any variables, but you want to see if some units are doing a better job at getting patients into the bed than others. You need to consider practical considerations. This really can come back to haunt you if you don't think about how much time, money the project is going to take, whether subjects truly are available or not, whether you have approval to use a certain measure, or maybe you're studying the effects of an app, the management of diabetes. Does the manufacturer give you permission to use that app? So those sorts of things, you want to find those out first before you dedicate too much time and energy to your research. So this is planning, so very important. As I said, you could be doing a descriptive study or an interventional study. So you have to think about your design of your study. You can oftentimes use different designs or even studies a subject of interest from a qualitative view versus a quantitative view and find out different pieces of information. But then your research question will be a little bit different too. So you really have to hone in on the purpose of your study. It does help to review the literature to see how other researchers have tackled your content area. Hone in on suggestions for future research as you read through articles. Give you hints to where the gaps are in that research area, and that's where you want to focus your study. You don't want to just repeat the same kinds of studies that have been done in the past, finding out the same answers necessarily. So once you think about your research question, all these practicalities, you want to select the very best design for answering your particular research question. And there are different designs, pre-test, post-test, longitudinal studies where you take, measure the same variable over and over again. So if you choose a design like that, why are you doing that? Do we just need one point in time to see if there's an effect of an intervention? That sort of thing. So this is where talking with others sometimes helps too, to get their ideas and their questions. Other people might have thought of something that you didn't think of. Other considerations are your variables of interest. What are you studying? What concepts are you studying? What measures will you use? Is there a measure to actually quantify what you're interested in? So as I said, what has already been done in the research area or gaps? What sources of data are available to study those variables? Maybe you want to do a chart review, for example, and you want to compare patients who are nonverbal at the end of life with those who are verbal, and you want to see if they're getting less medications, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But the problem is there going to be information on the chart telling us whether the patients were verbal or not? It might not be. Nurses might not be consistent in documenting that item. So those are the kinds of things you have to think about. If you're using a sample in your study, will an adequate sample be attainable? Who are you going to study? Where are you going to find them? Is it even possible? So these are the kinds of things that you need to consider in your research plan. Some components that you'll write, and we're going to talk more about all of these. Already talked about some of them. Starts out with your research question. Your purpose statement is the aim of the study, why you're doing the study at all, how it flows from that research question. Your research hypothesis is what you think you're going to see. For example, if we're looking at the effect of therapeutic touch on fibromyalgia pain, we've looked at prior research to show that therapeutic touch helps with other types of pain. So we expect that it will help decrease the pain in fibromyalgia. But because there have been those studies on that group, we want to study that. So that's your purpose and your research hypothesis. Problem statement would be, why is this a problem that I care about? Why should I care? How is it a problem for people as individuals, for families, for communities, in all domains, psychological, physiological, financial, social, etc. So that gets us to a problem statement is a statement saying generally why this is a problem, and it's broader. And then as you get into significance of the problem, that gets into the detail that I was just discussing. How is this a problem for individuals, families, in all domains? Are you looking into an intervention? If you are, you really need to find out everything that you can about that intervention as well, how it has been studied in the past, what kind of methods have been used to study it, etc. So these components, getting a good understanding of these components will help to get you started in formulating a research plan. And these items are also part of a research proposal. And there are different formats for proposals, but all of these items are discussed in some detail. So other things to think about are the variables that you're studying, both independent and dependent. I always remember this, people get mixed up on this. Excuse me. Dependent variables depend on what the independent variable is. So for example, if you're studying an intervention and its impact on pain, the intervention would be the independent variable and the dependent variable would be fibromyalgia pain, for example. In that example we mentioned earlier, the independent variable would be therapeutic touch or placebo intervention, perhaps. So it's very important to identify those variables because you're going to have to find some way, at least in experimental research, to control them, to define them, and you're going to have to limit any extraneous variables. These are things that are outside of the experimental conditions that can influence the dependent variable. So there are other factors, for example, in our fibromyalgia pain example, other variables that might impact pain for that person. Maybe some of your participants are on opioids. You know, that's information. We can't necessarily take them off their opioids, but we can collect the information, what meds they're on, so that we can report upon it. So sometimes extraneous variables are called confounders or confounding variables, and they're also called spurious influences, which I think is pretty neat, spurious influences. So these are things we want to limit and avoid. And if we can't eradicate them, we at least collect information on them. So you'll include a literature review. And many researchers make the mistake of not looking at enough literature and not really having a full understanding of their topical area. You also need to think about ethical considerations. I have students every once in a while who want to do something that is highly unethical. For example, an example would be not limiting Narcan use. A person may only be able to have a dose of Narcan if they attend a class to learn about treatment in addictions. I did have someone interested in doing that. I said, I don't think you're going to get much support for limiting Narcan at this time. So that's just an example. There are many. Do think about whether your intervention is ethical or not. For example, we can't take away medications from clients. We can't do that. They're relying on those meds for their treatment, but we can collect information on what medications they're taking, as I said prior. So you'll use a quantitative or qualitative methods. You'll describe your sample, and you'll have measures, select measures that are reliable and valid. This is all a part of your plan. You haven't done this research yet, but these are the kinds of things you need to consider. I find oftentimes students give absolutely no thought to their data analysis plan. They may have a measure, that's great, but there's other data that you might want to obtain, like demographic data, for example. Some data that you'll collect just to describe your sample. The age of the participants, perhaps their socioeconomic status, if that's a factor that could impact your study, their gender possibly. So you have to figure out what demographic variables you think would be important to collect and have that in your data analysis plan. But even more importantly, what are you going to do exactly with this data? Are you going to enter it into Excel if it's numerical data? Are you going to use a particular computer method for identifying common themes and verbal reams of verbal data that you've obtained from participants. What are you going to do? You need to plan this up front, what you plan to do with your data. So that's just a bird's eye view of creating a data analysis plan. I may have missed a piece that we'll be talking about, but I wanted you to just see the whole picture so that you can start considering how you're going to put all these little pieces together. And I would also encourage you to keep track of everything that you've written in this class because you may use it again down the road. So start collecting it in folders or on a jump drive, and you can even start building your project right now. All right, everyone. Thank you.